basically how strong they are. So the faster and the louder they call, the stronger the individual. Of course, that doesn't always mitigate male and male combat, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So when a male frog finds a suitable female and the female wants to mate with the male, they go into what's known as amplexus. And amplexus means to embrace in Latin. So who do you want to guess which is a male, which is a female? So just show of hands, who thinks the one on top is the male? Okay, there's a decent amount, and that's correct. So basically, the male takes on the energetic burden of calling and kind of like male-on-male combat, and the female takes on the energetic burden of bringing the male to the suitable body of water to breed. Right, and actually there are many different configurations of amplexus. So this is the pretty typical form where the male will actually put both its thumbs underneath the armpits of the female, and they'll both hop to a proper body of water to breed. Which is why, for amphibian researchers, occasionally we do surveys where we need to actually remove some genetic material from the fingers of frogs. We never ever touch the thumb, because it is a very, very important part of the reproduction, and if it's removed, they may not be able to amplex as well to other females. And occasionally, like you mentioned, remember I mentioned male-on-male combat. So occasionally the males get a little bit too impatient, and they will actually try and sort of like pull off another male that is currently in amplexus with a female. So the one on the bottom is a female Bengal toad, and these two over here are males. What will happen right now, actually what happened after this was both males actually started fighting. So frogs fight in a very different way compared to humans. You know, humans, they just like punch each other and whatnot. Frogs actually try and push each other over to basically exhaust their opponent to the point where they will actually have to go and take a rest so they cannot breed anymore. And actually, the toads in the UK, the common toad, actually has a even more interesting method of mate choice. By if the female doesn't like the male on her back, what she will do is she will actually jump to a much stronger, larger male. So that male will pull that one off and fight with him, so that she will get to mate with the male of her choice instead. So occasionally, sometimes they also get a little bit confused because they call a lot at night and it's very dark, so they won't always be able to recognize the same species. These are two different species. The one on top is a tree frog, it's a four-line tree frog, and the one on the bottom is a Bengal toad, the same species as the previous slide. Now, the one on top is a male, again, the one on the bottom is a female. Unfortunately, because they are different species, they will not be able to breed at all. Now, of course, they won't even try. Eventually, the male or the female will realize that it's not the same species on the back or the one that they're amplexing with, and they will actually separate. Yeah. So that's it for your breeding cycles. So we will move on to nesting strategies. So, like I said before, it's very commonly thought that frogs usually breed in forest streams or pools or flowing streams and things like that, but actually they can use foam nests, phytotelmata, which is basically tree holes that have filled with water in forests. They can breed in pitcher plants as well. And brood care, meaning they actually take care of their tadpoles and kind of see them to a certain age in maturation, as well as direct development, which I will touch upon a bit later. So this one right here is an example of a foam nest. This is very, very frequently observed in tree frogs, so species of frogs that live up in the canopy and high up in the canopy that will not usually come down. The only reason why they come down is for breeding. And what will happen is the male will go through the entire courtship ritual, and when it finds the suitable female, it will actually climb a tree and find some leaves, a collection of leaves or whatever, that's above water. They both will secrete this sort of like slime that will foam up into this very thick layer of foam. And the females will lay their eggs and the males will release their sperm, and this becomes the nest. And you can actually see over here some of the eggs on the in the nest itself. And the reason why they actually create a foam nest is because it actually protects the eggs from predators. Yeah, so after this, the female will, both of them will actually move away from the nest, and when the tadpoles hatch inside the nest, they will drop into the body of water that is below this. Yeah, and this, we do have this behavior in Singapore. It's made by the tree frog. So if you ever near any body of water, like a fountain or something like that, and you see a mass of a yellowish, sort of yellowish, dirty yellow foam, is actually made by a frog. And that will eventually become tadpoles and eventually become frogs. So moving on to your tree holes, again, this is a strategy employed by species of frog that live in trees, so they don't have to actually come down from the tree and go into any body of water. Unlike the previous example, the parents of these eggs do not actually create foam. What they do is usually a male will be calling from the tree hole, and it will guard the tree hole from other males. And a female will go to it, and they will actually kind of like glue their eggs to the sides of the tree hole. And because it's filled with water, you can't really see it well in this photo, but this is filled with quite a bit of water. The eggs will hatch and drop into the tree hole and develop there into frogs, basically. This is basically, this kind of breeding is usually restricted to better forests because that's where you will find a lot of tree cavities and things like that. You won't really get this in urban frogs. Now, the next one is very special because this is a lip of a pitcher plant, and that pitcher plant is of the narrow-lid pitcher plant species. Now, a lot of us associate pitcher plants with catching flies and catching ants and things like that when things fall in and they die. For this specific species, however, it has actually evolved away from trapping insects and invertebrate prey, and what they do instead is, because their aperture is so wide, any leaf litter or detritus or basically anything that falls into these pitchers is actually what they feed on. So they don't specifically trap invertebrates. And because of that, the liquid they produce is not it does have digestive enzymes, but it's not very acidic, and the enzymes aren't very strong. So this particular species of frog, and it is only a single species, it's known as the matang narrow-mouthed frog. It's found in Borneo. They actually spend their entire life cycle within these pitcher plants. So the males and females kind of like hop around near the pitcher plants. When they're ready to mate, they both will go into them, release their eggs and sperm, and the tadpoles will develop in the pitcher plants. And when they're ready into froglets, they'll come out. And actually, this particular individual, you can see, is starting to develop legs. So it's almost ready to get out of the pitcher plant. Yeah. And we do have a similar species in Singapore, but it doesn't only breed in pitcher plants. It can breed in tree holes, small collection of water, or any plastic cups that have been discarded. Yeah. Now, the next one is brood care. As you can see, this particular male has a clutch of tadpoles on its back. And like I said before, you know how I said the female takes the energetic burden of bringing the male to the water, and the male takes on the energetic burden of calling. In this case, it's actually the other way around. So the females in this species are the ones that predominantly call. The males do call occasionally as well, but they will actually sit on the eggs and wait for them to hatch into tadpoles and kind of like have them crawl on its back. And then it will hop to not one, but multiple different puddles or clear forest pools to deposit his tadpoles in. So it's basically the frog equivalent of not putting all of your eggs in a single basket, right? So by putting it in different multiple pools, it actually increases the survivability of his tadpoles. Again, this species is only found in Borneo, and however, this kind of behavior is found throughout the world. Right? There are two species, I believe, in Borneo that do this. There are more of them in South America that do this as well. And the final one we will talk about is direct development in frogs. What does this mean, right? Like I said before, there is always an egg, tadpole, and frog stage. These frogs actually skip the tadpole stage. So what happens is when the eggs are ready, or when the eggs are fertilized, they will develop as tadpoles in the eggs themselves, and they will not come out of the eggs. Only when they are fully formed froglets, only then they'll actually break out of the egg and jump away. Now, this kind of behavior is very, very useful in areas where there aren't a lot of bodies of water. Yeah. So this particular species is known as the greenhouse frog, and unfortunately, we have them in Singapore. And why I say it's unfortunate is because they are an introduced species, and they are actually from South America. And the reason why they are introduced in many, many areas in the world is precisely because of their direct development abilities, right? You don't need to bring over sort of like pots of water for them to breed. What happens is if people import plants from South America, they don't notice these small frog eggs and they just develop into full adults, and that's how they spread throughout the country. So this species was first recorded in 2015. I believe it was in Clementi. Now they are literally all over the island. If you go to Sentosa on the Imbiah Trail and whatnot, and if you step on the leaf litter, it sounds like rain because there are so many of them jumping around. Currently, we do not know their effect on our native biodiversity, but it's not because they do not affect it. It's predominantly because there are no studies being done on these species in Singapore, which is unfortunate. Speaking of Singapore, let's talk about the frog diversity. So for such a small country, we do actually have a surprising amount of frog diversity. We have a total of 29 species of frog in Singapore, and it's across 7 different families, right? So the family over there, let me see if the pointer works. Okay, it doesn't work, never mind. So that one over there was the greenhouse frog I was talking about. It's not native, and its family is also not native to Singapore. The next one is your litter frogs, which we'll be talking about a bit later on. Those are your narrow-mouthed frogs. These ones are your true frogs. These are your tree frogs. These ones are your fanged frogs. They're called fanged frogs because they have teeth in their mouth instead of like a band, a teeth row, right? So these guys, if you get bitten, they do actually hurt. And the last one are, of course, your toads. And this is a good time to bring up what the difference is between frogs and toads, right? A lot of people think it's a skin thing and it's where they breed and things like that. And to a certain extent, it is true. Generally, toads have rougher skin in comparison to frogs, and toads are able to tolerate more drier conditions than some species of frogs. But when it comes down to it, all toad species are actually frogs, which is why this is important to show, because all of these are frogs. They're just in their distinct families. So toads are one family, and the rest of them are also in separate families. That's basically the difference between frogs and toads. So let's talk a little bit about chorus frogs. These are the very small jumpy frogs which you will encounter very often in paddy fields or grass fields or anywhere in parks actually. Let's first talk about the Muckleshoot's chorus frog. This particular species is actually introduced to Singapore. It's most likely from Indochina. And they've been recorded first in 2014, and like the other species of frog, they are found all over Singapore. The next one is the Mantis chorus frog. This particular species is the rarest one, and it is the only species that actually is found in your forest. So the rest will be found in and breed in ephemeral pools like these. However, the Mantis chorus frog breeds in clear forest pools. The dark-sided chorus frog is again a very common one that can be seen in and around parks, and it's called the dark-sided chorus frog because you can see its side is sort of like grayish black. And the last one is the painted chorus frog. In my opinion, it's the most pretty out of all of them because it has sort of like a yellowish gold lining patterning on its back. And this is also the largest species of chorus frog in Singapore. This is the smallest species. So if you ever are in the forest and see very tiny things jumping around, it could be insects or it could be this species of frog. And if you do go out in the field, I wish you the best in finding all of these small critters. Right, now the next one I'm going to talk about is the Malayan horned frog. This is actually one of my favorite species in Singapore. Unfortunately, it is actually critically endangered, and it is only found in a very, very small patch of forest in Bukit Timah and another very small patch of forest in the Central Catchment Nature Reserve, so Macritchie, that kind of area. They used to be very, very common to the point where back in 1997 and the late 90s, after heavy rain, if you go to Bukit Timah, you can literally just see them along the trails and whatnot. Unfortunately, their populations have taken a very, very big hit, and they are now struggling to survive in Singapore. They are also among the largest frogs in Singapore. I've seen some overseas that are maybe almost 10 centimeters across or almost even 15 centimeters across. And they rely on cryptic camouflage. What do I mean by that, right? This is what I mean. How many of you can actually see the frog? Show of hands. Okay, that's a decent amount. For those of you who don't see it, these are the eyes. This is the back. So it really looks exactly like a leaf. It even has the sort of like the leaf veins. Oh, okay. It even has the leaf veins and whatnot, and some tubercles that kind of show thorns on the leaf. In fact, they believe in their own camouflage so much to the point where we have been searching for one. We had been searching for a single individual in Malaysia, and it was so confident in its camouflage that it actually called right in front of us. And if you do see one in the field, most of the time they don't actually hop away. They'll just crouch down and stay still because they would much rather rely on their ability in camouflage than the ability to hop away from a predator. Yeah, so this is again a beautiful species, and they do have very, very unique tadpoles as well. As you can see, it has sort of like flat lips, and that helps with the feeding because these guys breed in fast-flowing streams, and what happens is they'll open their mouth to basically catch any detritus or any food that flows by them in the stream. Yeah. So it is a real shame that this is critically endangered in Singapore because they are very, very common in the rest of Malaysia and Borneo, to the point where in a single night, on a good night, you can find about 20 or 30 of them. In comparison, in Singapore, I have never seen this species. Yeah. So the next one in Singapore is your rhino frog. Unfortunately, this particular species is also endangered, and it is restricted to swamp forests in Singapore, which is the rarest habitat type that we have. In the past, before the colonial times, quite a fair bit of Singapore used to be swamp forest. Now only, I believe, about 0.01% of our land cover is swamp forest, which is what makes this particular frog very, very rare. They have what's known as sexual dimorphism, meaning you are able to differentiate males and females purely based on how they look. So males will actually have a horn-like protrusion on the head. This one is not very visible, but in the next slide, you can kind of see a much more visible horn near the top of the head, which is why it's called the rhino frog. And these guys breed in pools as well. Yeah. So the next one on the list is the Subaraj's paddy frog. Now this has a special place in my heart. It is also critically endangered, and it's the most recently discovered frog in Singapore. And why it's special to me is because I helped describe this species. So I was part of the team that actually went out to Kranji and actually found them and described them as a novel species. And we actually named it after Subaraj Rajathurai, which is the man pictured over here. He was one of the pioneer conservationists in Singapore. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019. This frog was described in 2021 in his honor because he was a mentor to many people in the nature scene. We decided to dedicate this after him. Yeah. Right. Moving on to the thorny bush frog. Now, again, this is another species with very, very cryptic coloration and patterning. The difference between this and the Malayan horn frog is the Malayan horn frog mimics leaf litter, right? So it predominantly is found on the ground, so it tries to mimic what's on the ground. This is a tree frog that mimics bark. As you can see, it has a lot of tubercles and a lot of raised, bumpy skin. So when it goes on a tree, it literally looks like it's part of this tree. It was last detected in 2011, most likely because it's critically endangered and it's very difficult to find. Unlike the Malayan horned frog, this is very rare regionally. All right, so I've only seen a single individual of this in the Malay Peninsula, and I've never seen them in Singapore. It breeds in tree holes, and you can actually see this particular male was on a tree hole, and you can see the eggs over here. Yeah, it's not super in focus, but it's near the bottom. Yeah. So these are the frogs that I've chosen to showcase in Singapore. Unfortunately, most of them are critically endangered. But yes, those are the ones in Singapore. Moving on to the region, I will, like I said before, will be predominantly focusing on the Malay Peninsula and Borneo. The first one I'll be talking about is the Wallace's flying frog. This is native to Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. And why it's called the flying frog is because this species or this group of animals are actually able to glide from tree to tree. If you take a look at its forearms and hind limbs, you can actually see flaps of skin that are extended. Like you can see over here, and in between its toes as well. So, in Southeast Asia, the predominant forest type is actually dipterocarp forest, right? What that means is a single family of tree is found here, and they grow very, very tall. The tallest one in Borneo is about 90 meters in height, right? So a lot of animals in Southeast Asia have actually developed the ability to glide from tree to tree. And this frog is one of them. The reason why they are able to glide is because it takes a lot more energy to climb down a very tall tree, move to another tree, and climb all the way up again. So this is to save energy as well as to kind of like avoid predators, because they can just jump off of a tree and not worry about landing because they can control where they land. And this species is actually named after Alfred Russel Wallace. He was Darwin's counterpart. Darwin did his work in the Americas. Alfred Russel Wallace did his work in Southeast Asia. And in fact, he actually visited Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, or not, at a point in time it wasn't a reserve, he visited Bukit Timah Hill. And he commented on the beetle diversity. He said, within a meter by meter patch in Singapore, we had so many more beetle species than the entirety of the UK. So he was actually one of the great naturalists that pioneered the theory of evolution, and he actually co-published with Darwin. Yep. So this is a beautiful species that can be encountered anywhere from the Malay Peninsula and on Borneo as well. The next one is the Bornean rainbow toad. Now this is a interesting species because it was only rediscovered in 2011 after not being seen for over 80 years. After, I believe it was collected in 1924 and only rediscovered in 2011. So it was almost missing for a period of 87 years. Yeah. It's endemic to Sarawak and Kalimantan, meaning it's only found there and nowhere else in the world. Yeah, so which is why it's actually endangered, and there are only a handful of modern sightings. And this is a beautiful toad. They call it the rainbow toad. It doesn't really have all of the colors of the rainbow, but it does have some beautiful red tubercles and very nice green coloration on it as well. Now, they have this coloration because they're found on trees, so it's kind of to blend into the moss and all of the greenery on trees themselves. The next one is also a very colorful frog, or a green frog, I should say. It's known as the mossy bush frog. It's actually endemic to Borneo again, only found on Borneo, nowhere else. This is another species that develops via direct development, meaning their tadpoles just stay in the eggs and wait until they are fully formed froglets, basically. It relies on cryptic camouflage to kind of evade predators, and you can see it's actually very has some nice sharp tubercles at the top to kind of like break up its camouflage on trees. And this is an example of what it looks like on the tree. This isn't normally what they look like. This one, the one we found, was a bit active, so you can actually see its yellow-colored belly and whatnot. If it were actually sleeping, which is what they will need to rely on their camouflage for, they would basically be a single. They'll put their arms and legs in and just sit on the mossy bit of the tree, and it's impossible to see them. Yeah. So now that we've talked about a lot of critically endangered species, and hopefully I've helped you guys appreciate amphibians a little bit more, let's talk a bit about the threats facing amphibians. Unfortunately, there is quite a lot of threats, as probably you can see that majority of the ones I've talked about today are critically endangered or endangered. So loss of habitat is a very, very big problem facing amphibians, not only in Singapore, but basically everywhere else in the world. Just to use Singapore as an example, we only have about 22% of forest cover left on Singapore, right? And a big part of that is planted, so man-made areas. Of our original forest cover, we only have about 0.1% of that left. And that's why a lot of our frog species are critically endangered, specifically for Singapore. The second threat facing frogs is known as the chytrid fungus, right? So I'm sure a lot of you know frogs rely on their skin a lot to kind of like breathe and take in sort of like dissolved oxygen in the water. So what this fungus does is it actually makes the frog unable to do that. So it very slowly kills the frog, and it's a very, very big problem outside of Southeast Asia. Thankfully, we're not as badly hit. It's a big problem in the Americas. It's a big problem in Australia. And many, many species have actually gone completely extinct because of the chytrid fungus. Yeah. So the reason why we don't have that much of a problem with it. Our frogs do have chytrid. It just doesn't seem to affect them. The reason why is because it's thought that chytrid originated in Asia. So a lot of the frog species present here do have a level of resistance towards the fungus. The third one is known as the Rana virus, and Rana meaning frog because it specifically targets frog. This is a American bullfrog, the ones that we eat for frog porridge and frog legs and things like that. And we believe, you can see how red the thighs are and how there's a lot of reddish spots on the body. Most likely this species or this individual was actually suffering from the Rana virus, right? And if you take a look at its hind leg, this is bone. So it got eaten down to the bone based on the bacteria and the viruses around it. So it's a very, very slow death, and it's affecting many, many frog populations around the world. And finally, climate change. So how climate change is affecting frogs? Because remember I said that certain species of frogs are very, very sensitive to temperature change. Because global temperatures are increasing, a lot of frogs that are only found on mountain tops are finding that they need to go higher and higher and higher in elevation, to the point where they're literally only going to be found at the tip of the mountain if we don't do anything about this soon. So, sorry for making you guys sorry for talking about depressing things. Let's talk about what we can do. So, I need to give a bit of context to this photo right here, because I promise I don't go out and just catch random frogs in the field, right? What we were doing was we were actually researching or trying to detect the presence of the chytrid fungus in Singapore, and which is why we always wear gloves when it comes to handling of frogs. Right, the first important thing is the ex situ breeding of frogs, because if the populations are very low, it would be good to have a captive population that you can release back into the wild. And that comes into the second one with reintroduction programs, because if you don't release the population back, they will never ever recover, and the populations will always remain low. It is also very important to monitor the spread of chytrid, because there's this saying that happens quite often in the amphibian community where you can treat chytrid in a lab very, very easily. But if a frog gets it in the wild, it's going to die. So you need to monitor the spread so that you can employ sort of like mitigation measures to stop the spread. And finally, conservation of forested areas. Because you can have a C2 breeding program, you can have a reintroduction program, and you can monitor the spread of chytrid, but if there's nowhere to release the frogs, they're going to go extinct anyway. And you're only going to be left with a captive population, which is not useful in terms of, which is not useful for anything except for people to look at the zoos and just look at them and that's it. So these all should be done in tandem and not, they should not be isolated. Yeah. So thank you all so much for listening. I will be taking questions now. Yeah, if anyone has any. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Ying Tong, for that. Fascinating, as usual. Yeah. Okay, first, maybe Felix, do we have any online questions at the moment? Okay, no. So maybe we'll just open up to the floor first. Does anyone have questions at the moment? Okay. Sorry, can you just, because it's a live stream program, so we'll need you to wait, get the mic from my colleague and then speak into it so they the Zoom people can hear you.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to know is that what sort of impact actually with declining or extinction of frogs? Because I think by the look of frogs of toad, it's not something attractive and also not something that people would embrace. So what is the actually greater impact of all these frogs going extinct?
Yeah, so if we go back to the slide on how frogs actually, what role they play in the ecosystem. So, okay, anyway, so frogs, they play an important role by being indicator species, right? So if a single species is wiped out from an area, it'll be harder to detect the degradation of that habitat or detect the change in water quality and things like that. Secondly, they really do help control the invertebrate population. If we were to remove frogs completely from the ecosystem, the invertebrate population would explode, which means more pests, which means a spread of very likely mosquito-borne diseases, dengue, malaria, Zika, things like that, right? So that's why it's important to keep amphibian populations at the normal level. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, question there. Yeah, man in grey shirt. Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to, because normally after a rain, you always hear the frog or toad croaking, right? But it's very, very difficult to see or find them. So for a layman, how do you look for frogs or toads in a neighborhood?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I actually do have one last slide I forgot to show you guys, which is resources, good resources that you guys can use for frogs. Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So we do, I have actually established a frog call library in Singapore. So if you go to this link, and by the way, the slides will be provided to the people here and on Zoom as well. So don't worry about taking photos. You can actually go and learn. We have about 90% of Singapore's frogs recorded. So you can go on that website and learn their calls and things like that. When it comes to finding frogs, a good way to do it is go out at night. But you need to be aware of where you're allowed to be. So basically, in Singapore, you're not allowed to enter nature reserves after 7 p.m. and before 7 a.m. But if you go to places like the Rail Corridor or Bukit Batok Nature Park and things like that, if you go with a torch, what you're able to do is, if you keep the torch at eye level, you can see what's known as eye shine, right? So, you know when you take a photo, sometimes there's the red eye effect. It's the same principle. If you have the light source at your eye, you will be able to see light reflecting back from the animal. And that's usually how we find frogs. Yeah. But if you're talking about finding frogs when they call, it is very difficult. I have trouble finding frogs when they call as well. Yeah, just based on the call. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think there's a question online.
Okay. Yes, okay.
Hi, okay, I'm just conveying the questions online. There are two questions right now. The first question is, Are they poisonous if we touch any fluid excreted from a frog?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Not all frogs are poisonous. So by and large, only toads are poisonous, although we do have a few other Singaporean frog species that are poisonous, such as the Gunther's frog and a few other species, which is why generally I would not recommend randomly picking up frogs if you don't know firstly what they are and whether or not they are poisonous. However, if a frog does accidentally jump onto you or you accidentally brush up against one, the poison, unless it's an open wound, the poison will not affect your skin. You just need to get it washed off as quickly as possible, and don't touch your eyes, don't touch your mouth, and don't touch any sensitive parts of your face.
Thank you. Another question is this: in the ex situ breeding program, how do you determine how many to release back into the wild whilst keeping the ecosystem in balance?
That's actually a good question. What you would want to do first is when you're looking at a population for frogs, you will need to do a baseline population, right? You need to go into the field, survey how many frogs there are, firstly, and secondly, what viable sites there are to reintroduce the frogs into. So it'll depend on the species and depend on the site, but there are models that can be used to determine what number you should be released and what number should be kept for further breeding. Yeah.
There's another question. How much impact does exotic frogs like Gunther's frog or Gunter's frog have on native species, and what are the measures to protect native species from the exotic species?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. Unfortunately, the answer to the question is I don't know. Because like I said before, in Singapore, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of studies on the impacts of introduced frog species on native frog species. However, there is definitely some impact. I don't know how much. Specifically for your Gunther's frog, they do secrete poison, and they have been recorded to kind of affect other frogs in the same water as them. Yeah. Sorry, there was a second part of the question. Was there a second part of the question?
I think this is the question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Another one just came in. What are the ongoing studies of frogs here, and who is coordinating them?
I'm not very sure, actually. We do have one study that's kind of in the progress right now. Like I said, the Frog Call Library. I'm heading that one, trying to record all the species of frog in Singapore. The rest, I'm not very sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll take a question from here. Yeah.
Thanks. Does the farming of frogs, the industrialization of frog farming, affect the frog population in the wild?
That's a good question. So, thankfully, one of the only frogs that are farmed, there are a few number of species, but the one that's mainly farmed for food is your American bullfrog, and it is a I don't want to say sustainable, but they don't take from wild populations. So all of their frogs are bred in captivity, and they've been doing so for many years. And actually, switching to eating American bullfrogs might actually have helped our native population of frogs recover. Because in the past, in the place of American bullfrogs, your fanged frogs were the ones that were eaten. So let me see. So it would have been this group of frogs that would have been eaten. And they are still eaten in parts of Indochina and other places as well. Yeah.
So I was thinking along the lines of the chytrid fungus and the past history we have in terms of swine flu and bird flu. So I was thinking about how, would those diseases migrate and then affect because of the farming happening over here, right. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So thankfully, like I said before, they don't really ship those frogs overseas. They don't really ship them to the Americas or to Australia where the problems with chytrid are actually occurring. I'm not actually very sure on how chytrid initially spread to the Americas and Australia, there are some theories that it was spread through the Korean War. So there were the Americans were there fighting the North Koreans, and when they went back to America, it's thought that was how it was brought over. So that's one of the theories. So by and large, I think, and I'm not an expert on this, I really don't know. I'm sure areas that breed frogs have good biosafety measures, not only for the frogs, but because we are consuming them as food, they have to be food safe. So I think they should have a decent amount of protections in place, but I'm really not sure. Yeah, one question from Zoom.
Okay. This question is there smuggling or imports of exotic frogs, for example, poison dart frogs, into Singapore for pet trade?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Singapore is one of the hubs for the illegal wildlife trade. It warrants a whole other presentation, and it's a whole field of study. But people definitely do smuggle frogs in, not only frogs, but a lot of other things as well. On top of that, they do also poach frogs from the wild in Singapore to keep and to sell. Yeah, that is a problem that's affecting the entire region. Yeah. Oh yeah, one more question. Yeah.
Okay. This is regarding the ex situ breeding of frogs in Singapore. The question is, has the program and the reintroduction found any success?
So there has been one reintroduction program for frogs, and it's actually of this species right here. This is the cinnamon bush frog. I believe it was listed as vulnerable in the Singapore Red Data book. They basically took individuals from around Singapore and reintroduced them into the Singapore Botanic Gardens. There's a single patch of forest there where they put them in, and it's been a success so far. So the populations are doing well, and it's been good so far. Yeah, so that's currently the only one that's been done. Yeah, for frogs, I should say. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions from the room at the moment? Yeah. Question in the back. Thanks.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first one, I remember years ago, the aquarium used to sell little frogs for arowana owner to feed their arowana fish. May I know what species are these? The second question is, your interest in bioacoustic, right? So what's bioacoustic and how is it relating to frog research?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there are generally two species of frogs that are used for food in terms of for feeding fish. So it's again the American bullfrog. So the juveniles will be used to feed arowanas, to feed snakeheads. And I was actually just at a fish shop this after lunch. I went to look at them. So it was American bullfrogs, and this other species known as the field frog, or your crab-eating frog. So it's those kind of species, yeah. Yeah. As for the question about bioacoustics, so the field of bioacoustics is the study of animal sounds, right? So for frogs, we look at their calls, predominantly their advertisement call. So what I've done so far in bioacoustics in Singapore is I've gone around trying to record, like I said, all the species of frog in Singapore. We've so far gotten 26 out of 29 species, which is a decent spread. What I've done is I've visualized, analyzed, and described their calls, and I am intending to publish as soon as I'm done writing the paper. Yeah.
How are we as lay people able to help in this activity? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I would say just the first one would be spreading the word, right? So there are tons of resources online, and you can just share them with your friends and make them aware of the struggles that amphibians are facing in the world. The second one is to volunteer, right? There are many organizations in Singapore that take in volunteers. I'm currently from the Herpetological Society of Singapore. We conduct free guided walks once every month, so feel free to join those. The Nature Society of Singapore does good programs as well, and I believe NParks does also have their own kind of like volunteer program. You will be helping with conservation on a whole, not specifically with frogs, because in Singapore it's gotten to the point where the conservation of habitats and the rehabilitation of habitats are actually, that's actually how you improve frog diversity. Yeah. As for the reintroduction programs, that requires a bit more specialist skill set. So most likely you won't, lay people will not be able to help out with that. But they might call for volunteers, I'm not very sure. Yeah.
Felix, any questions from Zoom?
Yes, there are two. One, we have a participant who's asking, when you hear a frog call, how do you estimate the distance of the frog from where you are?
One way of estimating is how loud it is. So the closer you are to the frog, the louder it will be. However, with frog calls, it's difficult. What I found is, especially for tree frogs, their calls tend to sound like they're coming from very high up in the tree, but they're actually just at the base of the tree. So it is very difficult to estimate where it is without actually seeing the frog itself. Yeah. However, I'm sure there's a research component to this that studies it. Yeah.
There are two more questions here. One is, what are the species which can be commonly found in our neighborhood parks? And the other one is, are there any venomous frog species in Singapore?
So the ones that are commonly found in your urban parks are basically these ones, except this. So it's mainly your chorus frogs, your greenhouse frogs, things like that. You will be able to find the crab-eating frog and the field frog as well. So those are the ones that are more commonly found in our urban parks. As for venomous frogs, there is one species, but not in Singapore. I believe it's I can't remember exactly where it's native to. But yeah, we don't have venomous frogs in Singapore. Yeah. Okay, so my brother says it's South America. Yeah, he's at the back, by the way. Yeah. So yeah, the only venomous frog in the world, I believe, is found in South America. Thank you.
There's a question online. Are there any species that's considered nationally extinct? I suppose it's referring to Singapore.
Yeah. Nationally extinct. Yeah, I don't think there are any. Thankfully for frogs, we have been doing quite well with them, so no nationally extinct species. But for reptiles, we have quite a few. I will be talking about that in my two other talks on lizards and snakes. Although it could also be due to the fact that a lot of the early colonial collectors didn't really collect a lot of frogs. So it could be quite a few of them have gone extinct before they were detected in Singapore. Yeah. But as currently no nationally extinct. Yeah.
Is there a national frog for us? Something that we can,
Yeah.
The red ones are very pretty though.
Yeah. I would love for the cinnamon bush frog to be the national frog. Definitely. Let's start a petition. Yeah.
Currently, we have a national bird, right?
I think it's unofficial as well.
Yeah, unofficial.
Yeah.
And it's red too.
Yeah. It's the I forget the
I
common
can't remember
name.
the name. But
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the crimson sunbird. That's the one.
Yes.
Yeah. That's actually also a good contender for national snake. But I'll attend the other talk and I'll tell you about it. I think we have a few more questions. Yeah.
The question is, why are tadpoles not devoured by the pitcher plant?
Okay, so for that one in particular, is that specific species of pitcher plant. They, like I said before, they evolved a way just trapping insects, and they predominantly get their nutrients from leaf litter that has actually fallen into the pitcher. So they are, the liquid that's inside the pitcher plant isn't as acidic, and the enzymes aren't as strong. So which is why not only do frogs breed in them, but mosquito larvae breed in them. Oh, sorry, mosquitoes breed in them, and some beetles can actually be found in them as well. Yeah. And we have that species of pitcher plant in Singapore.
Questions from the floor? Yeah. Anyone? Ah, okay, one there.
Do you have any recording of frogs call that you can play now?
Yes, let me. Yeah, I do. Let me pull it up on my phone.
Interesting, we're getting all the questions about the sounds. We actually did do a talk with him about sounds, so just specifically about frog calls and all that, yeah.
Yeah, hold on, let me just pull it up on my phone. It's here. Let me choose a good one. Okay, so I'll play the call of the cinnamon bush frog. Can you guys hear it? Yeah. So can you hear the very loud "twee" sound? That is actually one of the responding calls. So let me just play the advertisement call. Let me play one more. Yeah, so they're all kind of like responding to each other. Yeah.
It sounds more like a bird, right?
Yeah. Some frogs that call higher, they can sound like birds. Yeah. The difference is if you hear them at night, most likely it's a frog. Yeah. And owls sound very different, so you'll be able to tell the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, but when you did the talk, it was really fascinating because there were some frogs that sounded like machine gun.
Oh, well, actually, let me play that.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. Sorry, let me see if I can find it. Okay, I can't find it, but I'll play one of the true frog calls anyway. This is actually one of my favorite sounds in Singapore. So if you ever go into like a swamp forest, this is the one you will hear predominantly. Yeah, and I think you have the call of the, yeah. Okay, so this is the call of the forage toad, and that one over there at the corner. Yeah, let me play it. Yeah, this is also one of the very cool calls. And yes, I do have the black-eyed little frog, the one that sounds like a machine gun, which is this one. Yeah, so it really does sound like a machine gun. Yeah. I encourage you to explore the frog voice, the SoundCloud. There are really a lot of good tracks on there. Yeah, if I can say so myself.
Yeah, they just need to go to the link, right?
Yeah, so you can just click on the link at the bottom. And there's also one on the Bornean frogs. I really recommend going to that website and listening to the frogs because they have so much more diversity than us. This one, the frog voices of Borneo. Yeah, I think they have about Borneo has about 180 described species of frog, so they have about 40 overcalls, I think. Yeah. I'm not very sure. I need to get. So if you go to our Facebook, I do not have that on this. If you Google the Herpetological Society of Singapore or HerpSoc SG, I think I can include it in the slides that are sent over. We usually post it on our social media 2 to 3 weeks before the actual walk itself. Yeah, we will not be having one for August. We'll be having one for September, I believe. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any? Felix? Oh, okay, good. We have one question at the back. Yeah.
Are all frogs carnivorous?
Okay, so that's a very good question. It was thought that majority of frogs were carnivorous. Basically, frogs are a mouth and a stomach with legs, right? They launch themselves at anything that moves, and if they can put whatever in their mouth, they will just eat anything, right? That's basically what a frog is. However, very recently, I believe it was last year, a Brazilian team found a frog that actually feeds on nectar. So it also helps with plant pollination, although that behavior is very rare, and so far it's only restricted to that species of frog. Yeah.
So they actually eat both plants and meat, or?
I'm not very sure. I think that species was recorded eating nectar, but I'm sure they feed on like insects as well. Yeah, so they're omnivorous. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Any? Okay, so none from Zoom. Okay. Maybe just a general question, because one of the slides that you showed made it look like the male is smaller than the female. Is that generally the case?
By and large, yes. Male frogs tend to be smaller than females, except in Singapore, except for this. Where is that? Okay, except for this species. Or this group of, or this family. And the reason for that is because they guard their nests. The males can get ridiculously large. The largest frog in Singapore is in this family. So it's called the Malayan giant frog, and the biggest specimen I've ever seen was about 26 centimeters from snout to the vent, yeah, which is a huge frog. And it was collected in 1970, so it's pretty recent. Yeah, so they still do exist in our forests, although not nearly as big. And the one that I was holding, this one, was 16 cm from snout to vent. Yeah, so they do get a lot larger, and this was a male, and it was actually guarding a nest. Yeah, so we caught it, swabbed it, and put it back. Yeah.
Okay, any? Oh, okay, question from Zoom? Yeah.
We have this question here. Which species can be kept as pets, and where can we get them?
Okay, so in Singapore, this is both for reptiles and amphibians. There are only about a few species, only I believe 3 that can be kept legally. So you can keep your red-eared slider, which is the basic terrapin that you see in pet shops. You can keep the Malayan box turtle, as long as it's not poached from the wild. So there needs to be like some documentation that comes with it. And the only frog that you can legally keep in Singapore is the white tree frog. It's a species that's native to Australia. So those are the only ones that can be kept legally. Yeah.
Okay, any last questions? Okay, we have one more, yeah.
In your research, do you do DNA testing on the frogs?
Not in my research, no, but that is a lot of people, when you collect frogs, you will take DNA with it as well. Most of the time, it's actually, if you're collecting the entire frog, you will take the liver. If you're not collecting the entire frog, you will just take like a toe tip clipping or try and swab it for some skin. Yeah.
Felix, no more. Okay, maybe, yeah, so we'll just end this part of the Q&A, but I still have a few more announcements, but maybe first we thank Ing Song for the...
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.